At once the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from far away.
It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will, Lord.
Morena, good morning. How are you this morning? Good. There's a few of you that were good. That's excellent. Yes, my name's Andrew Gould, and as a bit of an introductory, most of my time I spend as a dairy farm consultant, or at the moment I'm more of a dairy farm counsellor, as I sit with farmers across the table and I'm trying to work out how close are they to committing suicide. It's a different slant on my job in the last 2 years, from trying to make rich people richer to trying to help people survive who are going broke. So that's my Monday to Friday job. It's fantastic. It is fantastic because when you're just helping rich people get richer, then sometimes you can wonder what you're doing here. What's God got me in this place for? And it's times like this that I see that God's placed me, that I've been with farmers for, in some cases, 15 to 20 years. And there's a trust there that even when they're going broke, they're still willing to pay me to turn up and to help them through this time. So it's a really awesome time for me as a Christian mentor to help these people through. So that's part of my job, Monday to Friday. I guess I'm called a managing director of 3 dairy farms in Australia, where we have about a total of around 2,000 cows that I'm sort of in charge of from a distance. I'm the perfect dairy farmer where you can run the dairy farm and don't have to milk the cows yourself. Hey, it's the perfect job in my world. I love it. So I spend quite a lot of time doing that. I've got a wife and 3 children. All 3 children have come to hear Dad speak today, make sure I don't do anything wrong. So they're a joy and a pleasure. It's fantastic being a father of a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old. So it's all good. We're out of the single figures, so that's cool. I'm also part-time studying towards a Master of Theology through Carey. I'm taking about 10 years that some people brighter than me can do in one. And so it's a journey I've been on for some time. I'm a terrible student. I can hardly read, let alone study. And so it's a challenge for me, but it's very, very good for me. So I think that's me in a nutshell. We've been coming to this church, this wonderful place that we just love so much. We've been coming here for 8 years, I think. I said 9 years last time I spoke, which was about a year ago. So if any of you remember that, and now we've only been here 8 years, you're confused. But I was wrong last time, all right? I'm not wrong this time. It is only 8 years we've been here. Anyway, so that's me. Now I've got this passage this morning, and it's a wonderful, wonderful passage that for me has just been a real challenge. And what I've done, I've titled it Our Lord's Supper. It's a section of the Bible that has often been called, or is called still in most of our Bibles, the Last Supper. And it's called the Last Supper because this is the last supper that Jesus has before he gets arrested and then taken away and crucified. So it's the Last Supper. It's also been called the Lord's Supper, and that's because at this point in time, Jesus actually takes this ceremony, this supper, and he turns it from being a ritual that some of these guys have been doing, well, they would have been doing all of their lives, and he turns it into a ritual about him. So it's often called the Lord's Supper because this is where Jesus turns this ritual and makes it about him. I've renamed it again as saying Our Lord's Supper because I'm absolutely convinced that as much as this is about our Lord, it's just as much about us. And so this morning I've called it Our Lord's Supper, and I want to take you guys on a journey. I want to invite you in to this moment. We are now going to spend the next, 3 or 4 weeks at this church, and we're going to go through the next few chapters of this wonderful book. And all this time is actually going to be happening within hours. So we're going to take 3 or 4 weeks to go over what takes hours. And we're in the very, very last journeys of Jesus' time on this earth. It's a very, very precious time. And I'm looking forward to taking you through a part of that journey this morning. And I want to invite you in to the story. I want you to feel part of it. And I want us to join in and feel as though we're part of this supper with our Lord. So before we get into it, we'll read these verses that we've got in front of us. On the first day of the festival of the unleavened bread, When it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" Just before we go on, the Passover. Where do you want us to go and eat the Passover? Now, this is the Passover. Many of you will know, but the Passover was a ritual that was done every year at this time. All the Jews would go into Jerusalem and they'd have a Passover meal. Now, the Passover meal was to remember what had happened many, many years ago. Now, this, the beginner's Bible, right? I'm not the brightest, but I have moved on from the beginner's Bible. But this beginner's Bible is the Bible that we used to go through with our children when they were younger. They've grown out of this a bit. And we'd go through it and we'd read it from the front to the back, and then there'd be times we'd ask the kids, "What stories do you want to read? What story would you like to read tonight?" And almost always, our 3 children would want to go to the 10 plagues of Egypt. The 10 plagues, and I was always fascinated, but the 10 plagues it was. So the 10 plagues we'd read about. And we'd read about frogs and flies and blood. So this was when the Israelites were in slavery in Egypt, and then the 10 plagues were there when God chose, he wanted to change Pharaoh's mind so that the Israelites would get let go. Moses would be going to Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go," and Pharaoh would say no. And so then God would bring another plague. And then he'd bring another plague. And Moses would say, "Let my people go," and Pharaoh would say no, and God would bring another plague. And finally, the final plague that came was when Moses was told that all the Israelites could kill a lamb and spread the blood of the lamb over the front doors of the houses. And for those people who didn't have that blood of the lamb spread over the door frames, the firstborn in their family would die, firstborn son. And so that night, the angel came through, and every door that didn't have the lamb's blood on the doorpost, the firstborn son was killed. And that was called the Passover, because the angel would pass over the doors that had that blood on the door front. So that's where the Passover came, and that was the key point that Pharaoh said, "Right, go, you can take your people and go." Pharaoh's firstborn son had died, of course. And so it was that key plague that the Israelites celebrated every year after that point. And so, as per the ritual, Jesus was taking his disciples in and celebrating the Passover together. Right, let's go on the story. He sent 2 of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." The disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They were saddened, and one by one they said to him, "Surely you don't mean me?" "It is one of the 12, he replied, "one who dips his bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he gave thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "This is my body. Take it, this is my body." Then he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. "Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. "You will all fall away," Jesus told them, "for it is written, 'I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered.'" If you want to check that, that's Zechariah 13. Amazing chapter. "But after I've risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter declared, "Even if all fall away, I will not." "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. But Peter insisted emphatically, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all of the others said the same. as we come into the story, I want you to picture yourself with Jesus and his disciples. They're coming into Jerusalem. The place has been prepared. They're coming up the stairs, up into the upper room. And as they come up into the upper room, the custom and it's normal that the servants would wash the feet of the people coming in. Because normally they've been walking, they're normally in sandals, and as they come in, they normally take their shoes off and they'd have their feet washed. For some reason, it didn't happen initially. Maybe Jesus has prepared a test to see if any of his disciples would volunteer to do it on their own. So they came in, no one else volunteered to wash feet. And we know at some point in the evening, before the meal, that Jesus chose to sit, get on his hands and knees and wash his disciples' feet. So we know they entered. Now, I'm inviting you all into this room. I want you to all come and share this Last Supper. And I think, well, I haven't washed all of your feet. I've washed some feet this morning. And thank you, Rick, my good mate, who also washed some feet this morning. I'd like us to, maybe if you feel like it, unless your feet are a hazard, maybe come just take your shoes off right where you are now. Maybe just take your shoes off if you've got sandals on. Chuck your sandals off. Let's all come into this room with Jesus and let's take our feet off. Again, if your shoes are a health hazard to everybody else, all right, leave your shoes on. But if you're willing and you'd like to take your shoes off and come and enter into this room with Jesus and his disciples, then that would be awesome. This passage we've got to go through this morning has got a front, a back, and a middle bit. And I'm going to start with the front and the back, where we have at the start and at the end, Jesus talking about two friends and two betrayals. We see the first friend in the first story, which is a friend who has completely turned against Jesus. I'm calling him a rebellious friend. He was still a friend. He did things in the name of Jesus. He was with Jesus for a long time. He was a friend of Jesus who completely turned against him. And then the second friend is what we would all class probably as Jesus' closest friend. A friend who was very, very close to Jesus. And yet he also turned his back on Jesus. So let's look at these two stories. The first one, the rebellious friend. While they were eating, Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." Now I just want to picture you again, before this point of time, Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Jesus knew Judas was going to betray him. And Jesus got on his hands and knees and washed Judas's feet. "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they all said, "You don't mean me. Surely you don't mean me." And it sort of means, surely you don't mean me, do you? You don't mean me, do you? And we know when we read in John, when Judas says to Jesus, "Surely you don't mean me, do you?" Jesus says, "Yes, Judas, it is you." You could just imagine. What was Judas feeling when he was getting his feet washed by Jesus? That moment of washing feet. I washed feet this morning of people I'd never known, and yet the connection that you have with people when you wash their feet, and yet when you know the background of what Jesus was thinking and what Jesus was going through, what was Judas thinking and what was Judas going through, that moment of washing the feet must have been just incredible. Jesus says, "Yes, it is you." It is one of the 12 who replied, "Woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Folks, it is a terrible, terrible thing to betray the Son of Man. Woe to that man. It would be better for him not to be born. It is a terrible, terrible thing for us to betray the Son of Man. It is a terrible, terrible thing that this nation betrays the Son of Man. Jesus says, woe to that nation. It would be better if they were not born. As I see this nation, and as I see people, individuals who turn away from Jesus so blatantly, I get so sad as we hear Jesus saying, woe to that person, woe to that nation. It would be better if you were not born. we read just a few hours later. And I could imagine, if again we read John, we read that after the meal Judas left. And I could just imagine all the other disciples saying, Judas, 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 what a bad, bad boy. Woe to that Judas. Woe to that Judas. How bad is that? And then Jesus comes up. You will all fall away, Jesus told them. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I've risen, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. Peter declared, even if everybody else falls away, I will not. Even if everybody else does, I will not, Peter says. And then Jesus correctly tells him, today I tell you, truly I tell you, today yet tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will deny me 3 times. And Peter still gets up. He insisted emphatically. Peter's getting up on his haunches. Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. Peter was highly offended that Jesus would think that he, his closest friend, would disown him. And all the others said the same. This story is going to finish later on, next week or the week after, so you're going to hear what happens. But most of us probably know that that's exactly what happened. Of course Jesus was right. His closest friends, who denied emphatically, we will never, never disown you, within minutes almost, within hours, they disowned Jesus. We see in these 2 bits of the story, whether we're a rebellious friend or whether we're a close friend, Jesus says we will all fall away. We are not Peter, or we are not even better than Peter and think everyone else might, but we won't. We will all fall away. This is a very, very important point that we're going to get to when we look at the next part. So the bit in the middle, we've got Jesus doing this thing with the Passover meal. They're having the Passover, they're having the supper in front of them, and then Jesus has in front of him bread and the wine or the grape juice. And from this moment on, we celebrate what we now call communion on a regular basis. I grew up in church that did it on a weekly basis. I think we do it here on a monthly basis. But on a regular basis, churches around the world celebrate this ceremony, this activity that Jesus put in front of us today. And as a kid, I always wondered, why are we doing this again? Is it just another reason to give that same old person a chance to have a long prayer? Why are we doing this? Why weekly? Why we do this regularly? Why do we do it monthly? Why do we do this? And so the question I've got this morning is why? Why did our Lord set up this? Why did he do it that night? And why has it been set up for us to do it on a regular basis? And as I read through Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, and as well as Corinthians and other books, I've come up with 2 reasons that I think Jesus set this up. The first thing is, aside from these 2 reasons, that he's a very visual preacher. He might not have had PowerPoint or flash screens with this, but he was a very visual teacher. He knew that most of us learn by seeing stuff. He knew that a picture says 1,000 words. Jesus knew how to communicate with people. And so he set up a very, very visual thing to give us a reminder of what he was trying to say. And the first point he wanted to bring about was this was a point in time where he was bringing in a new covenant. So the first thing there is, what's the old covenant? This is a logical question for me anyway. I'm a good questioner. I just have lots of questions. So the first thing is, what was the old covenant? Well, the old covenant was when, so we had the Passover where all the Israelites were then let go, and then they went into the desert for a long, long time. And then we're hearing about the 10 Commandments tonight. So Moses went up to Mount Sinai, got the 10 Commandments, came down, had a fit of rage because the Israelites were being nutters, so he had to go back up, get the 10 Commandments again, and he came back down. And so the first covenant was when the people of Israel said to Jesus, or said to God through Moses, we will keep your commandments. That was the covenant. The covenant between the Israelites and God to say, we will keep these commandments. You've given these commandments, you've rescued us from the Egyptians, we now commit to keeping these commandments. And so what was happened is that the sprinkling, again, good old lamb, sprinkled the perfect lamb, put the blood over the stones, and that was the old covenant. The blood of the lamb spread across the stones, the Ten Commandments, as a covenant between God to say that Israelites would be his people, and a covenant with the Israelites that they would say, we will follow these commandments. So that was the old covenant. So then we come to the new covenant. And what I'd like to do is go back to Jeremiah, where he talks about this moment coming. Right, so in Jeremiah, he talks about what Jesus is going to do. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it in their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness, and I will remember their sins no more. That's the new covenant that Jesus talked about when he did this communion. When he said to the blood, this is the blood of the covenant, this is the covenant he's meaning, is that he is now going to be able to write on our minds and in our hearts, and that I'll forgive their wickedness and I'll remember their sins no more. In Matthew, the same line that we're just reading through Luke, Jesus says this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. This was the number one thing. There's two of them, these things that Jesus says, this is why I'm setting up this communion. I want you to know that the blood that I'm about to shed is the covenant, is the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. And Jesus was very, very careful to say many, not for you. So when he was talking to the disciples, he wasn't just talking about you, the disciples. He talked about for many, which is like for the masses, for everybody. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for the masses, for the forgiveness of sins. So at the same time, or just after, he's saying to Judas, woe to this person. Woe to this man who would betray the Son of Man. It would be better if you were not born. He goes straight into the point of saying, but I am going to shed my blood for the wickedness of the people and for forgiveness of sins. So Jesus wasn't turfing out people with no answer. He was at the same time providing the answer. The reason we do communion, the reason we do this on a regular basis is to be reminded that Jesus' blood is the new covenant. It's a covenant that was set up for the forgiveness of sins for the many. So the second thing we read about in these verses, when we read it through Luke, it's mentioned particularly, and in Corinthians, Paul reminds us, is that Jesus says, I want you to do this in remembrance of me. I want you to do this to remember me. And it's always been a bit of a fascinating thing, because I think in general we always remember Jesus' death when we do this. And I think Jesus didn't really just have in mind that I just want you to remember me dying, although with the covenant of the blood, that was clearly a focus. But Jesus also said, I want you to do this in remembrance of me, all that I am, all that I've been. And it often got me thinking, because I've always struggled a little bit with Jesus, because I've always felt as though he's had a big advantage to me of being perfect. You know, I think Jesus being God, he had that advantage of being perfect. You know, and so when you try and relate to someone, I try not to relate to the perfect people. I try and relate to the imperfect people. Anyone else have that feeling? You know, and I've often thought, I want to be like Paul, because he was far from perfect. And I think I can live with trying to attain someone like Paul. But I've always thought Jesus was in that too hard basket because he was perfect. And yet, it's that thing with Jesus is that he was a perfect person. He had no sin. But he had far from a perfect life. And it wasn't until I started remembering Jesus in his life, they'll think, well, he was perfect. He was without sin. There's no question about that. But his life was far from perfect. And as we look at his life, and I'd just like to just run you through some of the pictures of Jesus' life as we try and remember Jesus this morning. You know, this is a picture of Jesus a lot of us know, right? The lovely baby in a manger and happy Joseph, happy Joseph and Mary, and it's a lovely, happy family thing. But the reality is that as soon as Mary became pregnant before they were married, this couple was under a huge amount of pressure. And I'd say not just pressure, total rejection, probably within their closest family, from their tribes, from their areas. This family unit would have been under extreme rejection, isolation. It doesn't say that necessarily directly, but I'm pretty sure that's right. You know, and I've got this feeling of, how's it possible that when you go back to your homeland for a census, you know, we're all going back to our homeland, and yet there's no room for them? You know, I reckon if we all go back to our homeland, what we might class as our homeland, I bet you if there's a mother pregnant on the doorstep of dropping a baby, someone would find room for this lady, wouldn't they? Yet here they were, back to their hometown, and no one had room for them. Someone finally found them. Here, go out to our stable. This family unit was under a huge amount of rejection and isolation, I'm sure of it. I think Jesus had the privilege, from what we could tell, of a mum and dad that loved him dearly. But outside of that family unit, I think there would have been a huge amount of pressure and rejection within that family. And many of us come from families where it's not all tickledy pink, where we've not all read the beginner's Bible from day one, and we come under some huge rejection and isolation within our family units. Well, Jesus knows. He knows what that's like. Jesus was a young boy, and his parents again went back to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, like we've talked about. A day after they left, the parents finally worked out their son wasn't with them. I don't know about you. That doesn't happen today, does it? Mum knows where the kids are every moment, every day, right? It took them a day to work out that Jesus wasn't with them. Then it takes them another few days to find where he is. And Jesus is in the temple with the people there, talking about the scriptures. Amazing, these older gentlemen. And when mum and dad finally find them, they say, where have you been? We've been looking for you everywhere. And Jesus said simply, didn't you know I'd be in my Father's house? You know what his mum and dad said? This is his mum and dad who knew who he was. We have got no understanding of what he was talking about. The Bible says his mum and dad did not understand him. At 11 or 12, probably, maybe 10, here was this kid who nobody understood him. Even his parents didn't understand him. Jesus knew what it was like to be not understood, to be different, to not be the most famous or the leader of the group. He was different, and he was misunderstood. Again, maybe we've got people here this morning that see themselves as a bit different and misunderstood. Well, Jesus knew exactly what that felt like. This is one of my favourite bits. Jesus was a worker. Jesus was a tradie, I reckon. The chances are there's not much said about Jesus between that age of that last story, when he was young, 10 or so, and when he started his ministry when he was 30. There's a 20-year gap there. Two verses that sort of repeat each other. One says he was a carpenter, one says he was the son of a carpenter, which probably means a craftsman, maybe working with stones as much as wood. The fair assumption is that his dad was a carpenter, so he followed in his dad's footsteps. The fair assumption is, like everybody else, at the age of 12, he was become like an apprentice to his dad, and that he became the same and was a craftsman through until the point that he was baptized and met up with John the Baptist when he was about 30. Which makes there about 18 years in the middle of an age of this man, Jesus, who died when he was about 33. So over half of his life was spent as a worker. Now, I don't know about you, but I go to work some days and I think, what on earth am I doing here? God, why am I wasting my life working 9 to 5? Why can't I be like Ross and do something important like work in a church? Why can't I go and be a missionary? Why can't I do something that matters? Why on earth am I doing this job 9 to 5? We turn up to church on Sunday morning and we're Christians there and it's wonderful and we go to a fantastic church and sometimes volunteer at Phase or youth group, and I do that on Saturday night. But Monday to Friday, I've got this drag of a thing called work. You know what Jesus says? I know. I did it more than half my life. How would Jesus have felt? I can't imagine. I'd love to know more about that 18 years of his life. I'd love to know more. How did Jesus turn up to work every day? Knowing who he was, how did he turn up to work? I still bet he turned up to work early. I still bet he did his best at his job, but he must have thought the same things. What am I doing here? Aren't I the Son of God? Aren't I here to rescue the world? What am I doing here for maybe 18 years? Working. Folks, I wanted us to look at a video, and it's something that for me, I'm very, very passionate about work. And I'm absolutely convinced our work is our worship. And for those of us that do 9-to-5 jobs, just look at this video and hopefully it'll encourage you.
Work. Most of us spend over half our lives at work. Whatever it is you fill the 9-to-5 with, planting crops, building cars, taking care of patients, teaching students, or running a business, work is where most of life happens. For some, work is a drain. They dread Monday mornings, forcing themselves to struggle through because they need the paycheck, while many times feeling trapped and beaten down by their job. Some people love their work. They're good at what they do. It energizes them. It's a place of security, a place to chase dreams, desires, and success. At work, they find fulfillment. We often forget to connect our faith to our work. We don't consider the reasons God may have us at our job. We don't think about the purpose and meaning we could bring to our work. We simply focus on how it makes us feel. But what if we saw our work as an opportunity to worship? As Christians, we are called to serve Christ with our lives. For a few, that means working as a pastor, a youth minister, or a missionary. Others serve the church by teaching children or singing in the choir. But when Sunday is over, most of us return to our jobs outside the church. For us, our mission is in the marketplace. We may not be the kind of missionary who moves to the far regions of Africa, but around the conference table, around the water cooler, or around the cubicle, we have an opportunity to worship the God who created us. He gave us skill. He gave us passion. He gave us work. When we do our jobs with excellence and integrity and diligence, it's an act of worship. We are displaying God's craftsmanship to the non-believing world around us. We are earning the right to be heard. We don't see a divide between Sunday and Monday, between the sacred and the secular. We've been invited into parts of the world that a pastor or traditional missionary will never see. We have conversations with people who would never set foot in a church. Whether we love or dread our work, we choose to turn the focus away from ourselves and toward the mission God has for us. Church is not the only place we worship, and Sundays are not the only days on our calendars that have meaning. Every day on mission for God brings us great joy. Like the heroes before us, we can be modern-day Noahs and Josephs and Peters who are called with a purpose. God has designed us. He created us to work and to worship. For us, work is worship.
Yeah, amen to that. Now, as that video has been going around, we've been handed out the emblems. So if you haven't already taken them, then just hold on to them. Sorry, Rachel, I forgot to say it beforehand. Okay, cool. So just hold on to those. Hey, work is worship, folks, and Jesus knows exactly the trials and the tribulations of working 9 to 5. And if we're feeling a bit stink in our work at the moment, we can come to Jesus and we know that He's been there. He's been there with us. We all know Jesus as a preacher. This is just a picture of that. This is what the Bible is full of, is what He does. What continually astounds me, of course, shouldn't, but it does, is the fact that Jesus just relates to everybody. Whether you're young, whether you're old, male or female, rich or poor, a soldier or a beggar. Jesus related to everybody. There's no one there that He dealt with, and there's no one here in this world, there's no one here in this church today that Jesus does not relate to. Jesus was a leader of people. I know that being a leader can be a very, very lonely and isolating job. It's a job that often comes with some rewards, of course, but it often comes with so many challenges and the pressures. Decisions to be made that you know hurt people while it might make others happy. Leaders are generally some of the loneliest people in this world. And Jesus was no different to that. Jesus, as a leader, showed the example of being a servant leader. He was not a leader who brought out the rule book to fix people. Jesus was a leader who showed them love and humility. Jesus was a leader who was completely betrayed. So if you're a leader here today and you think you're having a tough time, Jesus understands exactly. He understands exactly, as a leader, how it can be feeling to be betrayed. And of course, Jesus on the cross, where this all really points to. And you know, the things with Jesus on the cross, when he says, "This is the blood of my covenant. This is my blood of the covenant, poured out for many," which includes us, for the forgiveness of sins. He knows that even his closest friends, he knows that even us sitting here today could well include people who, at the moment, are betraying him, who are fully rejecting Jesus and his love and his truth. And he knows there's people here today who will fall away, that will just deny him. Like me when I was at university, I just continually on Monday morning, when asked the question, "What did you do on the weekend?" would say nothing. I did nothing. What did you do on Sunday? I did nothing. I continually denied the fact that I even went to church, let alone that I was a Christian. And Jesus says we will all fall away. Folks, we cannot go through life without Jesus, without this promise of his blood. When Jesus came to this point and he anguished with his disciples and he washed their feet, he knew that he was only hours away from suffering the most gruesome death anyone could have. He knew that this is what he had to go through to have his blood poured out as a new covenant. And this is what he had to go through to be the person who could be that sacrificial lamb for the forgiveness of sins of many. Folks, it is up to us. Do we choose to accept that forgiveness of Jesus? And every time we come and we take this communion, that is what we're choosing to do. That is what we need to prayerfully, as we look at this bread and this cup in front of us, are we choosing today, every time we do this communion, are we choosing to accept Jesus' blood that he shed for us? Are we choosing to accept his forgiveness? Because we will all fall away. When they were eating, Jesus took the bread and broke it. And after giving thanks, he gave it to his disciples. "This is my body given for you." And then he took the cup. "This is my blood of the covenant, poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. Take it, eat it. Take it and drink it. And this morning, let us choose to accept Jesus and what he's done for us.